Uh,
You're muted, Mr. Meyerhoff.
yeah.
Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Good morning. Now can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm David Meyerhoff, the Holocaust Speaker Coordinator for the LA Unified School District and the Glendale Unified School District. The word Holocaust is Hebrew, Shoah, catastrophe. Yiddish and the Hebrew Urban is destruction. The systematic state-sponsored killing of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, and millions of others by Nazi Germany and its collaborators during World War II. The Germans called this the final solution to the Jewish question. Our guest, Joseph, has spoken to many Burbank, Glendale, and Los Angeles schools. He has presented his story throughout Southern California and around the world. His compelling story is really unique, even among Holocaust survivors. Without further ado, it is my honor to present Joseph Alexander. Uh-oh.
He needs to unmute.
Unmute.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you now, Mr. Alexander.
Yeah. Okay, my name is Joseph Alexander, and I'm a Holocaust survivor from Poland, and I survived 12 camps. I come from a small town in Poland, and I had a family. I had my parents, 3 sisters, and 2 brothers, and I'm the only survivor. My father was in business, and we had a very good life in Poland, a very good life, until 1939, when the Germans came into Poland. They divided Poland in 2 halves. One half was annexed to the Third Reich, to Germany. The second part was Poland under German occupation. And in Europe, as most people probably know, that every town has a town square, and that's where most of the business are. We lived in one corner on the square, the second house in the corner, and the third house was an uncle of mine. After a few weeks, they came and went after my uncle around the square and told the people they have 10 minutes to get their possessions together and get out in the middle of the square, and they took them away. A rumor started that they're going to come back 3 days later and take the rest of us. So my dad had 3 sisters living about 25 kilometers before Warsaw, which is the part of where it was Poland under German occupation. So Dad said, we're not going to wait for them to give us 10 minutes. So he rented a big wagon. We had deep wagons, about 6-8 feet deep. And he packed up a lot of stuff from the store, and he put a few pieces of household goods, some bedding on top, because from our part to the other part, you had to go through a border. So like we're moving. And my parents and one sister and a young brother, they left, and I remained with 2 older sisters, and we were loading up another way. In the meantime, the Polish people from around town were coming to town, and they were trying to buy anything they can get. So I sold a man a bicycle, and I sold him a boat of shirt material. On the way home, he had to pass the police station, so he got stopped. They thought maybe they were starting to looting. So I asked him, where'd you get this? He said, I bought it. And show me a receipt. He said, I don't have a receipt. And go bring the person who sold it to you. So he came back to me and he said, you have to come with me, and if not, they're going to come here. So I went with him to the police station. He asked me, did you sell him this? I said, yes. why didn't you give him a receipt? I said, we in Poland, we didn't give a receipt. So he took that boat material, smacked the guy and said, okay, go, you can go. And I went back, and my sisters were waiting for me, and we took off with the second wagon. And we came to a little town before Warsaw named Bologna, about 25 kilometers before Warsaw. We came there, life was going on almost normal. People were still in business, but everybody had to go to work. So being there for about a couple weeks, so I went to my first camp. That was 1939. Went to a camp where we worked during the week. On the weekend, you can go home. But the work we were doing was building a canal. And you stay in the water up to the knee without boots. And that was late October, beginning of November already, which in Europe, that's around winter time. And after a while, I was working there and I was getting blood poisoning. I had sores on my arms, on my legs. So I went home one weekend and I said, I'm not going back. So Monday morning, the police came to look for me and my dad said, he's not here. He's supposed to be in the camp. So I stayed away from home for a while, and that was the time where they were building in Warsaw, where the Warsaw ghetto was going to be. They were building the wall, where it's going to be walled in. And after a short time, they finished the wall. They came out and ordered that within 50, 60 kilometers, within the surrounding area of Warsaw, all the Jewish people had to move into the ghetto. So we moved into the ghetto, and you can't even imagine how terrible, how miserable it was. Because they put in a small area, what they made, 260,000 people. So it was terrible. People were dying every day. Every morning you walked out, people, dead people on the streets, on the sidewalks, everywhere. It was very bad, very bad. But we found out that back home, since we left, nothing changed. Everything remained the same. So my parents decided for an older sister and a younger brother and I, we should go back home. So go home, you have to get out of the ghetto. So you have to pay off the guard at the gate to get out. So we got out,
Jonathan used these two formulas
and
to solve your
after we got out, we decided we split up. My sister and brother will go, one take one street, and I'll take another street, and we go to the outskirts of town, and that's where we meet. So I walked for about 2 blocks, and I had a Polish teenager comes over, and he said, give me some money, I'm going to report you. So I thought I'd give him some money and I'd get rid of him. I kept walking. But he got on the streetcar, rode the streetcar for a couple of blocks, and comes over again, give me some money, more money. So this time I gave him some more money, but I changed street and I lost it. And I walked to the outskirts of town, I met my sister and brother, and we went home. We came back. I say everything the same since we left, nothing changed. But it lasted 3 days for me. After being there 3 days, I was free for 3 days. They said, old men from 16 to 60 report to the schoolhouse. So I had to report to the schoolhouse, and I was taken away and going to the camps. So the first camp I came to, we were building a dam. Building a dam is we were cutting down hills and we had little electric cars, the little cars to fill up, and they take them, you fill them up here and take them to another place and they dump. That work was a very hard work because we had to use picks even to loosen up the ground from the hills. And the food you were getting was a piece of bread in the morning, about like that, a little square, and a cup of coffee, and you went to work. You came back from work, you got a soup. Either it was from the peels from the potatoes or spinach. From that food, you couldn't exist doing the work we were doing. That was hard work. The only way you could survive is because we were working with civilians. And if you could manage to get a little extra food, that's the only way you could survive. In the meantime, people were dying. They were taking every morning, they were taking out dead people out. And we were in a city of Poznan. There were a lot of camps in the city and around the city. So the same thing happened at other camps. They combined. They combined 2-3 camps into one. After a while, the same thing happened at this camp. So I kept moving. And every time I moved, I had to go did different jobs. First one I moved from this camp was I went in a camp in the city, and I was laying cobblestones on the street. Then I was working we were building sewers. I was a roofer. I was all different kind of jobs. And then I was working, we were building an airport. I was laying railroad tracks. After being in 7 camps, a train arrived, and it wasn't a passenger train, you know. It was one of the cattle car trains where they put 40 to 50 people into one boxcar with a little window, 2 feet window. And the destination we were going, it takes maybe 5-6 hours at the most. But we were riding around for 3 days. No food, no water, no facilities. So people were dying on the train. By the time we arrived, our destination was Auschwitz. Came to Auschwitz, the train stopped. There's a little town named Oswiecim in town. Later on, they built the trains to go straight into the camp. But that time, they didn't have that yet, so the train stopped downtown. And 30-40% of the people were dead on the train already. Whoever could walk, you walked out, you were lined up in rows of 5, and we met Dr. Joseph Mengele. Dr. Mengele was called the Doctor of Death. He picked people for human experiment or for the gas chamber. We met him, and he said there's 6 kilometers to walk to the camp. So he said he's going to pick people who go to the left. The people on the left are going to be taken on trucks. So he went through, and he picked me out to go to the left. And I looked around. People on the left were old people, sick people. If I would come from home, I wouldn't know any different. But I was in 7 camps already. Every time I had to go to work, any camp, I always tried to get in with the biggest, strongest man. A little guy like me, I could get away with a lot of things, which I did. And here he tells me to go here, and I see old people, sick people. I said, no, these are not the kind of people I like to be with. My luck was, it was after midnight. It would have been daytime, I don't think I could have done it. When he moved further down, I ran back to the other side. Ran back to the other side, and we walked to the camp, to Auschwitz. Went to the camp, and I got took a shower, came out of the shower, and I got a tattoo. No. Yeah, can you see that? I got a tattoo on my arm, a number 142584. From that moment on, that was your name. You had no name anymore. I got the tattoo, and we walked to another Auschwitz II, which is Birkenau. Walked to Birkenau. Now we found out that the people who were taken on trucks, people on the left, went straight to the gas chamber. And if I didn't run back to the other side, I wouldn't be here talking to you. So I went to Birkenau, and I was in Birkenau for a while. And the people in Birkenau, I witnessed people were running to the electric fence to get electrocuted. I saw people being beaten to death. It was very bad. And then I was trying to see if anything comes up to get out of there. Any come for those who want to go to work, something to get out. So didn't anything. And then they came up with they need some tailors. My grandfather and my father, we were all tailors. So I report, and they come in front of me and said, you go back. We have enough. We don't need any more. So I'm still back in the camp. And that was the time, that was April of 1943. That's when, if you heard about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, there was a big uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto. So after that, they said they need a big transport, but they didn't want to take any people from Poland. Only Hungary, Greece, Italy, but on the end they were short about 300 people. Said now we take some people from Poland. So I report, and you get on the train, the same train time, and I was going back. I went back to the Warsaw Ghetto for the second time. That was after the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. So we came back to the Warsaw Ghetto. There was no buildings left. All the buildings were burned out. There were just remaining walls. And we came back, supposed to clean up that ghetto and take down those remaining walls brick by brick and stack them up in stacks about 8-10 feet high. That was our job, supposed to be. But we came back, there was no camp, there was nothing. So they gave us some prefab, and we had to put together our own barracks to get some place to stay. And there were no facilities yet. The shirt I was wearing, it was eaten up from lice. There was shreds. There was no shirt left. It was shreds. It was very bad. So until we built the camp, on Sunday you got a shower and you got some fresh clothes. And in the meantime, the typhus broke out. Typhus broke out, which is you get very high fever, very high temperature. And anybody who report to the hospital, nobody ever came out. I got the temperature, but I didn't report to the hospital because I had a we called a capo, like a foreman. He was a middle-aged German. He was a German man, but he was also a prisoner. So he didn't care if we worked or we didn't work. So when I got up to temperature, I was sitting behind those stacks of bricks for 3 days until I got over the temperature, and then I was okay. So we was working for a while, and then after a while, a Polish underground attacked our camp, trying to free us. So we're fighting all night, we were unsuccessful. So the next morning, they closed up the camp, they took us out, and to get out, we had to go throughout the town, through Warsaw. So we had the job to get out of town because they're afraid that the underground may attack us in the city. So we jogged to get out of town. We came out of town late in the afternoon, and they put us up on a big field where farmers graze the cows, and the ground is it's moist, very moist. So they put us up on that field, whatever means you have, a knife, a spoon, anything that you could dig up some mud. And you took the bottom of the shirt and squeezed the mud to get a little water. So we had a little water, stayed overnight there on the field, and the next morning we were on the road again. And we came to a town where there was a river. So they let us go to the river to get some water. We went to the river, so we got some water. Two of our people went a little further into the river. They thought maybe they would escape, get out on the other side. They were shot, were killed in the river. So we got some water, and then we have to walk again. So we walked, and then we come to the next town was the same river. They said only 100 people at a time can go get some water. So we went, we got some water, but that day it was very heavy rain. It was coming down so heavy that we were walking, with soaking wet. Until late in the afternoon, we arrived at the railroad station. Come to the railroad station, stayed overnight, and the next morning, the same train arrived. And that time we were 3.5 days on the train. We went to Germany. Went to Germany to a camp named Dachau. That was the first camp Hitler built in 1933 for political prisoners. Then he turned it into a concentration camp with the gas chambers in the oven. Excuse me. So I came there, Dachau, I walked on for about 2 weeks doing nothing, because they were establishing 12 camps, from 1 to 12 by number, around within 50, 60 kilometers around Dachau. So I was sent to camp number 1, and I was working digging potatoes for a farmer. That lasted about 3 weeks. Then I was sent to a camp about 50 kilometers from Dachau, to camp number 7, which it was located in a city of Landsberg, called Landsberg am Lech. That was a small camp, we were only about 150 people. But we come to this camp, it was a small group of us. We were in the camps already over 4 years. So we had the privilege of getting the better job. And that was the only camp I was with. Women were in the same camp, except they were blocked off one corner with the wire fence. But we went to work together. So my friends got a job to do with the kitchen. Some of them was the police in the camp, and some other little job. and I got a group of, we were 5 boys and 5 girls, 10 of us, and we were working right outside the camp, outside the fence, in the kitchen for the German guards. And I had 2 German men in charge of the kitchen, but they were middle-aged men, they weren't the regular army. So they were very nice men, very good to me. Because every day I was going back to work, from work, going back to camp. I used to take food for my friends. We had always had soup left over. I took a milk can, I put it in, and the next morning when people were going to work, they had to pass by our kitchen. So I used to stop them and give them some food in the morning. A couple of times, the officer in charge complained that I'm holding up the people going to work. So they told me, let them work, don't worry about it, let them work, do what you're doing. And that lasted until April 28, 1945. All the 12 camps had to go back to Dachau. So I came back to Dachau, stayed overnight, and the next morning we heard what they called a dead march. They're supposed to take us into the mountains in Germany. There's a ski resort named Garmisch. And they're supposed to kill us in the mountain there. But we walked about 2 days and we knew we're not going to be walking too far because we could hear the fighting. So we knew that the American troops are not far behind us. And the planes were coming over bombing the city. So I walked for about 2 days and we crossed a little bridge and the little bridge was blown up. So my group was divided in two parts. I was on the part of the right hand side, and we were in a little village. And there was a little forest in the village. So they took us into the forest, and they asked for volunteers to take the sick people into the village and put them into the barn at the farmers, and told the volunteers to come back. Excuse me. And the volunteer one of the volunteers was a friend of mine. And on the way back, they found a dead horse in the snow. So they cut up some pieces from the horse, and they brought back, came back with a piece of horse meat. And if you can see it here, that was my friend. His name was Joe Buddha. That was him here. He's the one that came back gave me a piece of meat and do something. So we were in the forest. I took up wood. I made a fire, and I was barbecuing. And believe me, that was the best barbecue we had, me, in a long time. Oh, I see here, you got the picture. And on the left, that was Joe Buddha, the one the tall guy. And I'm in the middle here. And that was my cousin. To the right. That was my cousin. He was the only survivor also from his family. So we got this, and the next morning, during the night, the guard disappeared. The guard disappeared during the night, we didn't know. So the next morning, the German police came, and they took us into that village, and they disappeared. That was in the morning, about between 8 and 9 o'clock. So we just walked around the village until between 12 and 1 o'clock. American tanks moved in, and we were liberated. So when we were liberated, the tank moved in, and there were American troops behind them trying to block off the village cut off not to let anybody out. But we were a group, 9 of us. They didn't want to get locked in by the American troops, so we broke through and we started to walk to see where the next town is. I walked for about either 1 or 2 kilometers, and there was a German bakery. So we got into the bakery, and everybody got a bread. So we had a bread, you were okay. And we walked short distance, and we came to a town named Bartels. And we walked in that come into town, and I saw 3 American soldiers, but they were Czechoslovakian descent. And they were walking, trying to walk. They couldn't, they have to hold on to each other. They were so drunk, they couldn't walk. And once they saw us, I guess the clothes we were wearing, so they asked, are you Polish? I told them, yes. So they said, come on. They took us in to an underground bunker. It was a warehouse. You couldn't see the end of it. I bet you everything you can think of, it probably wasn't that bunker. So the first thing, we changed clothes. Everybody took a backpack and put some food in. And then there was a big row of bicycles. They were chained up. They broke the chain, and everybody got a bicycle. Now we have to find a place to stay, because when the American troops came into the village, they brought all the people into that city. It used to be a German Air Force base, so they made a DP camp, a displaced person camp. But we didn't want to go. We were already over 5 years in camps, didn't want to go to the camp. So we tried to get out to the street. It was curfew, 6 o'clock. It was after 6. He couldn't get out. So we hopped over about 3 or 4 fences, and we came to a German inn, but was taken over by the American troops. In the back of the inn was an empty house, so we took over the house. And we stayed in that house for 10 days, about 10 days. They came out with an order. Anybody who lives outside of the camp had to move into the camp. So we moved into the camp, and we were taken back to Munich. Munich is the capital of Bavaria. We went back to Munich to a DP camp there, but you were free. You could live at the camp, or you can go any place you want. So I lived at the camp there about 3 days. Then I had some friends of mine. We were less camp number 7. So we decided to go back today to Landsberg, where camp number 7 was. And Landsberg was one of the biggest DP camps in Germany. So I went back there to Landsberg. We went to the camp, we registered in the camp. They gave us a room. I stayed there overnight. And the next morning, I moved out. The reason we went to register at the camp, because there was a lot of DP camps, so we went to register in case anybody of your family survived. So we always went to check the list. So the next morning I moved out to a farm, and I lived in a farmhouse. I lived in a farmhouse for about 6 weeks, and I decided to go back to Poland, to my hometown, to see if anybody of my family survived. So I came back to Poland, go to my house. So they had some survivors who were living on the 2nd floor. The 1st floor, there were Polish people living. But they said, no, nobody from my immediate family survived. Came back, but my own cousin, that's the cousin I just showed you, he was the only one who survived, but he is in a different town. And that was very bad time for the people survivors who came back, because the Polish people were killing a lot of survivors. They killed in one town named Kielce, 42 survivors in one town. So it was very bad. So I said, I'm going to get my cousin, and we're going back to Germany. I got my cousin, and we went back to Germany. I lived in Germany then for another 4 years after I was liberated, because you couldn't go any place. You didn't have a passport. You couldn't go. You have to wait until some country opens up. So after 4 years, living there 4 years, Canada opened up. They said they registered people to go to Canada. So we went, registered to go to Canada, and you have to wait until they call you. Took a long time, you didn't hear anything. So in the meantime, a friend of mine lived in the next village. He came and he said, Joe, you can go now to Munich, they're registered to go to America. So we went and registered in a very short time. I got a note to go to see the American doctor, and you had to go to the FBI to check you out. In a short time after that, you get a note to go to the port of Germany, Bremerhaven. There's a port where the boat was, to get to the boat to come to America. So I went, and went to the boat, and I got on the boat, and I arrived in the United States in New York. I arrived on May 30th, 1949. Came to New York, so everybody had to have a sponsor. Either you had some relatives here, or they had a Jewish organization, and so I didn't have any relatives. I was sponsored by a Jewish organization named Joint, and my contract was to go to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I went to Harrisburg, and I worked as a tailor for Harrisburg for a man who had a tuxedo rental in a cleaning store. And the man, a father, couldn't be better the way he was to me. He was a very good man. But when I came in May, and the cousin when he survived, he had an uncle here in Santa Monica. He was his sponsor. So he came in October. And when he came here, and he told the uncle that I'm in Pennsylvania, and we were the only two survivors from both of our families. So the uncle called me a few times, I should come here so we can be together. So I came to California January of 1950, and I'm still here. So here I am now. So now, if you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer you.
Mr. Alexander, did you want to go over the pictures with the audience before we get started with the questions?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, I can do that.
So let me share that.
Yeah.
All right, so we're back to the slideshow, and we can start here if you want.
Okay, this is a picture. The man standing up on the right-hand side. That was my dad, and next to him was his brother. The brother left Poland, didn't want to go to the army, so he went to England. So he lived in England, and those were my grandparents. So this picture was taken in 1923 at the border, of the Polish border, because my uncle couldn't come to Poland. So they met at the border. It was 1923. That was this picture. Okay, what else? Well, this is my dad here, and this on the right, that was my sister. She was my oldest sister. Her name was Shalamas, and that was my dad. And here are the three musketeers. That was a friend, Joe Buddha, on the right. I'm in the middle, and this is my cousin who survived at the right. That picture was taken by the farmhouse where I lived on the second floor here. That's what this. This is my liberation from Munich, where it shows you down here, and see on the bottom line there, it shows that I was in the camp from 1939 to May 2nd, 1945. Okay, do you have the other one from the Dachau? The green one?
What's up?
This is a picture. Okay.
There's the green.
No, or
That one.
I think you got it over here on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one shows you. That's my picture from Auschwitz, and there on the bottom here, there's my number. It shows 142584. That's this. And then I have another one here. You can see this. This is the liberation from Dachau. And you have the pictures, and that was a driver's license I have, which is no expiration date. That's the driver's license in Germany, which is like a lifetime. No, there's no expiration date on this. Yeah, this is when in 2015 I was invited by the German government to come back to Germany to celebrate the liberation of Dachau, 70 years liberation of Dachau, and I spoke to Angela Merkel in Dachau. She was the chancellor from Germany. So this is a picture here. We have the Holocaust Museum. There's the Holocaust Museum where before the COVID-19 epidemic, I used to speak there about 2-3 times a week to schools from all over around the area, way far away. I went to Bakersfield. And I spoke to the schools, and this is a case where I got all my original documents on display there. And this is a museum where they don't charge anything to go in. And if you have a chance, if they reopen the museum soon, you should go visit whenever you can. It's a very nice little museum, and it's run by Holocaust survivors. Well, this is my number here again. This was the California, Los Angeles Times I had last year, where they took this picture. It was in the Los Angeles Times, and then there's another inside the paper showing where I was speaking to a school. This is the way we lived in the camps. the like shelves, and there were one section was for 3 people. And on the bottom here, way more over to the right, the second row, move up the arrow here to the second row, to the end. Over there, right there, that's Elie Wiesel, is right here, on that bunk there. So this is the way we lived in the camp. So like I say, if you ever get a chance, after everything opens up, you should go to visit that museum. You'll like it.
Joseph,
Yes, please.
there's just one part that I think you need to mention just a little tiny bit. When you were mentioning about what you saw, something that occurred on Sundays in the camps.
Excuse me.
What you saw.
Well, what I had to witness 3 hangings. Every time somebody tried to escape, they got cut, and then on Sunday we had to gather around and watch them being hung. And like I told you, when Auschwitz, I saw people running to the electric fence to get electrocuted. I saw people being beaten to death. So it was always something.
Yeah, so I just want to say a few words that about what Joseph was saying. The rise of anti-Semitism and racism and hate in this country is really alarming.
That's what I was given to. So. Okay.
Go for it.
Go ahead.
No.
You want me to say it?
You need to say what you were going to say.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of anti-Semitism going around and Holocaust deniers. You know, they killed, murdered 6 million Jews. They didn't murder them because they were criminals or they did something wrong, only because they were Jews. And now we have a lot of anti-Semitism going on here and the Holocaust deniers. If you hear anybody saying anything about that you don't like, which is not right, you don't be afraid to report to the authorities. Because this has to stop. You have to get rid of that. These Holocaust deniers, because to me, I call them stupid, the Holocaust deniers, because the evidence is still in existence today. You go to any camp, Auschwitz, Dachau, Majdanek, Treblinka, Buchenwald, the gas chambers are still in existence, and thousands of people daily come from all over the world to see it. So that's why I say, don't listen what they say, what they tell you.
Right. So what I was going to say also is that the parallels between the United States and Germany in 1933 are really warning signs to all of us. So if you see hate, hear hate, racism, or any form of bigotry, don't walk away. Don't pretend that it doesn't exist. It's your responsibility to say something, do something about it. And I'm talking to all the students right now who are listening and watching. Do not walk by and pretend that it doesn't exist. It is your responsibility to say something, do something about it. Hate does not go away by itself. Hate speech is not free speech. When a person advocates the injuring or killing of other people, that is not free speech under our Constitution. We must unite all races and all religions to say no to hate, here or anywhere in the world. If Nielsen is, so Martin Niemöller was a very famous anti-Nazi Protestant minister who was imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp from 1937 to 1945. So Joseph was in the concentration camp from 1939 to 1945. But Martin Niemöller spoke these words: first they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Catholic. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. So students, you really need to think about what that means. And I would like to ask all the teachers to have your students write about what they learned today from this presentation. How do they feel about what they learned? And can they relate what they learned to their family? Their history of their family, or anybody in their family, their situation. I'd like them to, that's an assignment for all the students to, and if teachers, if you could give them like a week to write, and it's in 1 page, not 5 sentences, but really think, put thought into what your writing is. See, part of our program is writing thank you letters to all our speakers, but since the program is not as regular, of course, because of COVID, but so in lieu of that, to do a written response, and that's part of the program.
Thank you, Mr. Meyerhoff. At this point, I want to make sure also, Mr. Alexander, thank you. We want to make sure that if we have questions from students that we get them. And so teachers, students can pretty much put the question in the chat. Since you're one of the hosts, they can get the question directly to you. So at this point, if there are questions, we would like to honor that.
Mr. Mirov?
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. Can I please ask?
Go for it.
Okay, so we all know about the Holocaust. You know, a bunch of people died. Jews had to, be killed because of this entire mass extinction of you guys. So I'm asking, how can we Armenians be, how can we, I'm sorry, I'm kind of stuttering. We have to recognize the Holocaust that happened, but you guys kind of failed to recognize the Armenian genocide when it happened September 27 and so on before that. So I'm asking, how can that be possible for us to recognize and learn about your history, but when we ask you to recognize the Armenian genocide, you guys fail to do that?
That's a bad question.
Yeah, Joseph, if you want, I could answer, but if you want to answer.
Yeah. No, we do recognize the Armenian genocide. We may not come out and speak about it. Matter of fact, I was speaking to an Armenian Jewish center in Glendale last year. And we speak at all the schools, which mostly Armenian, probably in Glendale. The old Glendale High School, middle school, and high school. We recognize the genocide for the Armenian. It's not true that we didn't. We do. But we also recognize all genocide, not just Jews or Armenian. There are other genocides in Africa, in other countries. We also recognize any genocide who ever existed. So we do recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander, for that answer.
Can I just quickly add something that April 8th is Holocaust Remembrance Day, just a week ago.
A week ago.
And Armenian Genocide Day, April 24th. So they're actually only 2 weeks apart. And I will say that Hitler said about the Armenian genocide, nobody's going to remember it. And so Hitler used the Armenian genocide as part of a way of thinking that he could create the Holocaust and get away with it, and nobody would notice too. So there is a parallel, there's a link, and the fact that the Armenian genocide was the first mass genocide in the world against a people. And they were Nazi generals that were learning and training with the Turkish army, and they came to be part of the Nazis. So there's absolute parallel, absolute understanding, and every time we go and speak, like with Joseph and other speakers, and when we go to Glendale especially, which is about 75% Armenian population, we have an absolute total connection, and we must recognize, we must unite to fight against all genocides.
No, like I said, I spoke at the Jewish Center, the Armenian Jewish Center in Glendale.
Thank you both for that clarification. Mr. Alexander, we do have another question for you. What kept you going through, all your experience in the camps?
Well, this is a question I was going to say. I get a lot of this question from when I speak to the schools. When I was speaking in person, when we could go to school, and I asked, why did you ever think of giving up? So I always tell them, I never gave up, and I said, I never lost faith. I always believed in God, and I never lost faith. But I said, I may have a bad day today, but I hope tomorrow will be a better day. But never give up.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. There is another question here from one student. Do you have any from the Holocaust, from the family you had, other than those that you mentioned?
No, I don't. I don't have. I had a couple of cousins who survived in Russia. They went to Russia. But I lost several hundreds of aunts and uncles and cousins.
Thank you. And a similar question, did you ever consider living in Israel rather than in the United States?
Well, you see, I had a couple of things. I should have been in Israel, but there was something, God didn't want me to go to Israel. He wanted me to be here so I can talk to people. Because I have several occasions. I have a brother, which I took his name actually. This is not my real name, Joseph. And he was in a kibbutz in Poland for 6 months to get a certificate to go to Israel. That was in 1938. After he finished the 6 months, England had a minister called Balfour, called the Balfour Declaration. And he was the one who was giving out the certificate. When my brother finished the 6 months kibbutz in Poland, he cut the quota in half. So my brother had to wait for his turn, and the war broke out instead. Otherwise, if he would have gone to Israel, so I would have gone to Israel too. Then actually, when I was liberated, I don't know how many of you know that Israel had a army fighting with the British called the Haganah. I was liberated when I was taken back to Munich. At the time, after I was liberated, Haganah was coming through in Munich, and they asked if anybody wants to go with them, so they'll take us back to Israel. So they were going to Belgium, and they said on the way back, they'll pick us up. We were about 10 or 12 of us. Instead, coming back this way, they went a different way. So something told me that there wasn't my time to go to Israel. Otherwise, if they would come back, I would go with them. I would go to Israel. But they went a different way, so I didn't. So something told me that this is my time, I shouldn't go. So that's why I didn't go.
Thank you for your response, Mr. Alexander. Also, we got a thank you from Esther, the student who asked you that question on the Armenian genocide. And thank you, everybody, for staying with us. I know that it is time for you to go to your next class. So students, teachers, thank you for joining us. For those of you who have time, we will stay to debrief. But other than that, we hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
I know,
David, go
but
ahead.
the questions that we didn't get to, they could submit them to
They're in the chat.
Okay, because I think Joseph can still answer it later.
Oh, yes, I'll get the answers to those questions, and I will report them back to the teachers. Thank you for pointing that out.
And we want to thank everyone for being part of this very important program. And this is relevant to today. And that's something else you could write. Why is this relevant today?
So on that note, thank you, Mr. Meyerhoff. Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Like I said before, we will stay behind and debrief. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Petrie, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank everybody. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, Ms. Panessian.
Thank you very much. That was a fantastic story. And that was a fantastic presentation. I'm sure my students learned a lot. And I'm already writing out that assignment for them. Thank you for that.
I could send the question to Neil so he could send it out. Everyone. There are 3 questions essentially. If you'd like, I could.
Yeah. That'd be nice. Thank you very much.
I'll do that. A little bit later, Nielsen, I'll send you the 3 questions.
Yes, I will add those questions to the Holocaust Speaker Series folder so that you can access it there.
Thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you too.
So we're just going to wait for students and teachers to make it to their next class. And Mr. Alexander, I would like to take care of the afternoon session in terms of